April 9th, 1940. Night. A dark fjord, and a massive, invincible German cruiser, the pride of the Kriegsmarine, glides silently toward the capital of Norway. On its board are the Reich's finest officers, secret lists, and the ready-made administrative apparatus for the occupation of an entire country. By dawn, Oslo was supposed to fall. This was decided. It was inevitable. But it did not happen. It was stopped by a fortress, an old one, almost forgotten, armed with guns that were nearly half a century older than the cruiser itself. How? Why? And who was the man who dared to give the order, without authorization from above, alone, in the darkness, and by doing so, changed the course of the war? You are about to find out right now, because the truth turned out to be so incredible that it is still hard to believe today. Watch until the end. This is the story they never told you. To understand why the Blücher was steaming toward Oslo that night, we need to go back several months. Into the offices, to the maps, into the calculations of the men who moved countries like pieces on a chessboard. 1940. The war has already been going on for 7 months, but in the West, silence. The French sit behind the Maginot Line. The British wait. Hitler waits. Everyone waits. Historians would call this the phony war, but one question gives none of them any peace. Norway, a small neutral country on the edge of Europe. It would seem, what does it have to do with anything? But look at the map. Here is Sweden. Deep in its earth is iron ore, the best in the world. It is from this ore that armor, shells, and tank hulls are made. Without this ore, the German military machine would start to suffocate in about a year. And this ore reaches German factories by only one route, through the Norwegian port of Narvik, along Norwegian territorial waters. As long as Norway is neutral, this path is open. But what if Britain enters there first? This was exactly what Hitler feared. And it was exactly what Grand Admiral Rewrote told him. Methodically, persistently, month after month, Norway must be under the Reich's control. Otherwise, catastrophe. And here begins a truly uncomfortable truth. The German fleet in 1940 was not the British fleet. The Royal Navy surpassed the Kriegsmarine in every parameter, by number of ships, by tonnage, by experience. Throwing the German fleet into a direct confrontation with the British was suicide. And the German admirals knew it. Behind closed doors, they spoke plainly. The operation was too risky. The fleet could be destroyed. The price was too high. Hitler listened to them and insisted on his own way. Thus was born Operation Weserübung, a simultaneous strike across the entire Norwegian coast, from Narvik in the north to Oslo in the south. 6 cities, 1 night, no warning. Oslo was the main goal. To capture the capital meant capturing the king, the government, and the army command. To decapitate the country in a few hours, before it had time to recover. For this strike, they selected the best Germany had at sea, a heavy cruiser, brand new, almost unsinkable. They called her the Blücher. Imagine a ship 200 meters long. That is roughly 2 football fields placed end to end. Now imagine that this behemoth moves in the darkness almost silently, at a speed of 32 kilometers per hour. And on its deck are guns capable of blowing apart the wall of a skyscraper from a distance of 20 kilometers. This was the Blücher, a Hipper-class heavy cruiser, laid down in 1936, launched in 1937. The pride of the Kriegsmarine. 18,000 tons of steel, armor, and firepower. 8 main battery guns in 4 turrets. Anti-aircraft artillery, torpedo tubes, and onboard seaplane. Thousands of people attended the launch ceremony in Hamburg. Orchestras, flags, officials in dress uniforms. The ship was named Blücher, in honor of the Prussian field marshal who defeated Napoleon. It was a beautiful name. A proud name. But this name had a dark past, which they preferred not to remember that day. There was another Blücher, an armored cruiser of the German fleet, old, from a different era. In January 1915, in the North Sea, during the Battle of Dogger Bank, British cruisers shot it at point-blank range. It capsized and went to the bottom in less than an hour, along with nearly 1,000 crew members. 2 ships, 1 name. The same finale, as it would turn out later. But in 1940, no one thought about that. The Blücher was new. It was strong. It was a symbol of what the German fleet had become in the interwar years. And yet, here's a question historians still ask today. Why was it sent into the operation exactly now? The Blücher had not completed its full combat training course. Not all of its systems were finely tuned. The crew had not fully practiced coordinated actions. By naval standards, the ship was not yet fully combat ready. They knew this, and they sent it anyway. Because Operation Weserübung demanded the best ship right now. Not in 3 months, now. This decision would cost them dearly, but no one knows that yet. The Blücher took its place at the head of the squadron, course toward the Oslofjord, and waiting for it in the darkness was a fortress. The same fortress that German staff officers saw on every map of the strait, and which they had decided simply not to take seriously. Look at the map of the Oslofjord. A fjord is not just a bay. It is a narrow corridor between cliffs, driven into the land for 80 kilometers. Ships going to Oslo cannot choose their route. They go where the cliffs allow. One path, one corridor. And right in the narrowest part of this corridor, on an island in the middle of the water, stands Oscarsborg. The fortress was built in 1845, almost 100 years ago. Thick stone walls, bastions, casemates going into the rock. In its time, it was a serious structure. Serious for its time. By 1940, Oscarsborg looked as if it had been forgotten. Norway in the interwar years spent almost no money on defense. The country believed in neutrality. It believed it wouldn't be touched. It believed there would be no more war after the horror that happened in 1914 to 18. The fortress was not modernized, not re-equipped. The garrison was at about half strength. Shells were scarce. The equipment was decades out of date. But the main weapons of Oscarsborg were them. 2 guns, enormous, installed in massive turrets looking directly at the fairway. The Norwegian soldiers called them Moses and Aaron. These guns were made by the German Krupp concern in 1892, 48 years ago. Caliber, 280 millimeters. Each shell weighed as much as an adult brown bear, about 220 kilograms. Think about that. The weapon that would stop the Reich's newest cruiser was made by the same people who made weapons for the Kaiser in the century before last. But the guns were not all. Lower down the shore, in the rock, a torpedo battery was hidden. 3 torpedo tubes. Whitehead system torpedoes, a design from the early 20th century. By 1940 standards, almost antiques. The range was just over a kilometer. And here, pay attention. On the night of April 8th to 9th, the torpedo battery mechanics discovered that one of the tubes was malfunctioning. They tinkered with it for several hours, in the dark, in the cold. April in Norway is still almost winter. They finished the repair just minutes before the silhouette of the Blücher appeared in the depths of the fjord. A few minutes. The entire history could have gone differently because of a few minutes. The fortress garrison that night consisted of about 300 people. Many of them were reservists, people who had just been drafted, who had just figured out where everything was, who did not know whether to shoot or not, because the country was not yet formally at war. And over all of them stood one man, the commander of the fortress, a colonel, the man who had to make a decision, one single, impossible decision for all of them. Birger Eriksson was born in 1875. By April 1940, he was 64 years old, almost half a century in military service. A man of another era, the one where officers wore mustaches, wrote reports by hand, and believed that an order is an order, that the regulations were written in blood, that improvisation in war is a path to a tribunal. He was a professional to his core, and that is exactly why what he did that night is so incredible. April 8th, evening. Eriksson is in his office in the fortress. Outside the window is the fjord, dark and calm. It smells of the sea and cold stone. Somewhere below are soldiers' voices, the creak of boots on cobblestones. An ordinary evening. But the anxiety is already there. It appeared during the day, when the first reports came in. German ships spotted in the Kattegat. A merchant vessel reported a large convoy heading north. Something is happening. Something big. Eriksson picked up the phone. He called headquarters. They answered evasively. The situation is being studied. Wait for orders. He called again. Then again. The answers became even more blurred. In the Norwegian military command that night, chaos reigned, which they later did not want to officially admit for a long time. No one understood what was happening. No one wanted to make decisions. Everyone waited for someone else to take responsibility. And time was passing. Around midnight, Eriksson received the last message from headquarters. It was short and almost mocking in its specificity. Open fire only upon a direct order from the command. He wrote this down, put the paper on the desk, looked at it. A direct order never followed. The telephone line with Oslo by morning had effectively gone silent. They simply did not know what to say. Now imagine yourself in his place. You are an elderly officer. Outside the window is night. You have guns. You have torpedoes. The regulations say, wait for the order. Common sense says, there will be no order. And somewhere out there, in the darkness of the fjord, the low hum of turbines is already audible. Eriksson went out to the position himself. He stood next to the gun crews, looked into the darkness. Then he turned to the officers. His words are passed down slightly differently in various sources, but the meaning is the same. Either I will get a medal, or I will be court-martialed. He paused for a second. Prepare to open fire. While Eriksson was saying these words, the German squadron had already entered the waters of the fjord. On the bridge of the Blücher, Admiral Oskar Kumitz looked ahead. Cliffs on the sides. Dark water. Ahead, the lights of Oslo. He was sure. By dawn, he would be eating breakfast in the Norwegian capital. The fortress? An old fortress on an island? It would not fire. April 9th, 1 o'clock in the morning. The German squadron enters the Oslofjord. In the lead, the Blücher. Behind it, the pocket battleship Lützow. Following them, the cruiser Emden, 3 destroyers, auxiliary vessels. 8 ships, a single machine. Moving without lights. Only instruments. Only compasses and maps that staff officers had studied for weeks. On the bridge of the Blücher, it is cold. The April wind from the fjord is damp and piercing. Admiral Oskar Kumitz stands at the front window and looks ahead. He is 48 years old, an experienced sailor, a cold-blooded professional. His plan is simple and elegant. The squadron passes the fjord at maximum speed. No stops, no negotiations. They will appear in the Oslofjord like a bolt from the blue, while the Norwegians are still sleeping, while politicians are still arguing, while military men are still calling each other and asking what is happening. Surprise. That is the main weapon. The first kilometers pass peacefully. The fjord is wide. The cliffs on the sides turn black against the night sky. Somewhere a lonely lighthouse flashes. Silence. Broken only by the hum of turbines and the hiss of water under the stem. Then, the first shot. A coastal battery at Rewrote Island. Norwegian artillerymen saw the silhouettes in the dark. They opened warning fire. On the Blücher, battle stations lit up. The crews rushed to the guns. Kumitz did not change his expression. The order was one. Do not stop. The squadron returned fire and continued moving. The battery at Rewrote was suppressed quickly. Too small. Too weak. This was exactly what confirmed what Kumitz believed. The Norwegians are not ready. The Norwegians will not fire seriously. The squadron moved further. The fjord narrowed. The cliffs approached closer from both sides. The corridor became tighter. Right here, at Throwback Island, it squeezed down to 1.5 kilometers in width. And right here, in the middle of this corridor, stood Oscarsborg. By 4 in the morning, the fortress was already visible from the bridge of the Blücher, a dark mass on the island, the outlines of the turrets. And everyone on the bridge saw this. The gun barrels turned directly at them. Someone among the officers said it out loud. "The guns are aimed in our direction." Cummins looked ahead. They will not fire. This was not arrogance in the full sense of the word. Behind these words was logic. The German command had studied Oscarsborg, knew its age, knew the state of the garrison, knew that the political leadership of Norway was dragging its feet with any decision until the last moment. Firing on the military fleet of a great power is an act of war. A small country would not dare. The distance decreased. 2,000 meters. 1,800. On the Blücher, they sounded the battle alarm, just in case. The gun crews took their places. Anti-aircraft gunners looked at the sky. The engine room reported. Turbines normal. Pressure normal. 1,500 meters. 1,200. The fortress was already so close that in the darkness, one could distinguish individual stones in the bastion walls. And then, in the casemates of Oscarsborg, Colonel Eriksson turned to his people and uttered 3 words. Fire. 1 word. 3 letters in Norwegian. Those were the very 3 words. More precisely, 1. But before it, there were 2 others. Short. Quiet. The kind that the officers of his crews would remember for the rest of their lives. Open fire. In the casemates of Oscarsborg, there was such a silence that you could hear the people breathing. You could hear water dripping from the vaults. You could hear how below, in the darkness of the fjord, the low mechanical hum was growing. The Blücher's turbines were working at full capacity. The gunner of the Aaron gun, a young Norwegian artilleryman, pressed his eye to the sight. Later, after the war, he would speak of this moment simply. I saw the ship so well that I could distinguish the portholes on its side. Less than a kilometer. A huge cruiser in a narrow corridor. It was impossible to miss. And still, the hand trembled. Because it was not a training exercise. Not maneuvers. Not a target on a range. There, in those portholes, light was burning. There were people. Now let's look at the other side, at the Blücher. 4:19 a.m. Kummitz on the bridge. The fortress. Right there, almost next to them. The gun turrets are looking directly at them. The distance. Less than a kilometer. By all the rules of naval combat, this is the moment when you must either open fire first or leave. Kummitz did neither. He continued to move. Because he was sure. Because the entire logic of the operation, all the intelligence assessments, the entire experience of the lightning victories of previous months said the same thing. The old fortress will not fire. The small country will not dare. It was not stupidity. It was a belief system that had worked flawlessly up to this point. Poland, Denmark. Everywhere, surprise and speed decided everything before the enemy had time to realize what was happening. Cummins expected that it would be the same here, and in this second, in the casemate of Oscarsborg, an elderly colonel who was 64 years old, who for half a century had waited for orders from above, who throughout his military career had done everything by the book, this man broke the rules. He did not wait. At 4:21 local time, the Moses gun fired first. 3 seconds later, Aaron fired. The sound was such that in the villages along the shores of the fjord, everyone woke up. Glass rattled in the frames. Dogs howled. Children cried. And in the darkness over the fjord, 2 shells were already flying, each weighing as much as a young brown bear, toward the ship that was convinced it was safe. A second. 2. 3. Impact. The first shell hit the bow section. The second, the superstructure. On the Blücher, everything happened simultaneously. Explosion, fire, list. The sound of tearing metal, such that it drowned out everything. Drowned out voices, drowned out commands, drowned out thoughts. Cummins grabbed the railing. The deck shuddered under his feet. In the wheelhouse, glass shattered. Someone was screaming. Someone was no longer screaming. On the lower decks, chaos. People who a second ago stood at battle stations now did not understand what was happening. Smoke. Darkness. The list increases. From somewhere below, fire is blowing out. On the bridge, Cummins gave the order, increase speed, break through, pass the fortress. The guns reload slowly. If they manage to pass the narrow point before the second volley, there is a chance. There is a chance. But he did not know about the torpedoes. No one on the Blücher knew that under the cliff of the right bank, in the darkness, in the dampness, in the casemates carved directly into the granite, people were sitting at torpedo tubes. People who already see the cruiser. Who have already entered the data. Who are already waiting for the command. The commander of the torpedo battery, Lieutenant Andreas Andersen, looked at the silhouette of the Blücher. The ship was huge even through the viewing slit of the casemate. Burning, smoking, but alive. Alive and moving forward. Andersen gave the command. The first torpedo left the tube at 4:23. Seconds stretched out. The torpedo went under the water. Invisible, quiet, inevitable. Almost an antique by 1940 standards. A design from the beginning of the century. The speed, just over 30 knots. The distance was less than 500 meters. The impact hit the engine room. The Blücher's turbines stopped almost instantly. The ship, which had just been moving at full speed, began to lose headway. The list increased. Water gushed from the hole. Then the second torpedo entered. It hit where it was not supposed to hit by any calculation. In the artillery magazine. What happened next, witnesses from the shores of the fjord would describe identically. First, a silence lasting a fraction of a second. Then, a flash, such that the night for a second became day. Then, a sound. Not an explosion in the usual sense. Something deeper. Something that is felt not with the ears, but with the chest. The ship's ammunition detonated. The explosion was visible from Oslo, from 30 kilometers away. On the Blücher, the stocks of aviation fuel for the onboard seaplane caught fire. The ship burned so brightly that it illuminated both shores of the fjord. In this light, everything was visible. People on the decks, boats, people in the water. The German squadron was turning back. The Lutzow, the Emden, the destroyers, they were leaving. They did not break through. The Blücher remained alone. At 6:23, 2 hours after the first hit, the cruiser lay on its side. Seconds, and it went under the water. The depth in that part of the fjord is about 90 meters. It lies there to this day. Of the roughly 830 crew members and landing troops, about 320 people died. The rest found themselves in the water. The April water of the Norwegian fjord, plus 8 degrees, without survival suits, in the darkness. And while they were fighting for their lives in this water, 30 kilometers to the north, in Oslo, history was unfolding, for the sake of which all of this mattered. While the Blücher burned, in Oslo, the telephones started ringing. Not all of them, not immediately, but those who needed to know found out. The explosion in the fjord was heard in the city. The glow was visible in the night sky over the southern quarters. People went out onto balconies and looked there, into the darkness, not understanding what was happening. One person understood. Håkon VII, the King of Norway, was awakened at the beginning of 5 in the morning. He was 67 years old, tall, thin, with the straight back of a professional military man. He listened to the adjutant in silence, asked one question. "Germans?" "Yes, Your Majesty." He nodded and began to dress. In these same minutes, in the fjord, in the icy water, the survivors from the Blücher clung to everything that stayed afloat. Debris, life rafts, each other. The water temperature, 8 degrees. Without a survival suit, a person loses coordination in about 20 minutes, consciousness in 30 to 40. Among those who struggled in that water were not only sailors and soldiers. On the Blücher sailed Gestapo officers, officials who were supposed to immediately take control of the Norwegian police, the state apparatus, radio stations, specialists in interrogation. People who knew what to do with those who would resist. And they carried papers with them, folders, lists, hundreds of names. Norwegian politicians, army officers, journalists, public figures. All those who should be arrested in the first hours of the occupation, before they have time to hide, leave, go underground. These folders went to the bottom, along with the Blücher, to 90 meters, into the cold silt of the Norwegian fjord. Many people from those lists survived, continued the resistance, got in touch with the Allies, organized the underground. Some of them spent the entire war not knowing that their name was in those folders, not knowing that they were saved, not by chance, but by an old Krupp cruiser and 2 hits from another century. But back to Oslo. The government gathered for an emergency meeting at 4 in the morning. Ministers arrived in whatever they had, some still in their home clothes. The decision was made quickly. We are leaving. Not a capitulation, not negotiations. We are leaving, to continue the resistance from where the Germans will not reach tonight. Trucks pulled up to the State Bank of Norway. The country's gold reserve, 40 tons of gold bars and coins, began to be loaded into boxes. In the darkness, by hand. Bank employees worked alongside soldiers. Everyone who was nearby hauled the boxes. The train to the north left the platform when dawn was only just beginning to show over the city roofs. On its board, the king, the government, the gold, and a 2-hour head start. Exactly those 2 hours that the Blücher spent in flames in the waters of the fjord before going to the bottom. 2 hours, no more and no less. The Germans entered Oslo later that same morning, from the land, marching, almost without resistance. They captured the capital. But they did not find in it what they came for. The throne was empty. The government was on its way. The gold was on its way. The king was on his way. And while they were on their way, Norway was not yet defeated. The Germans took Norway. This is true. A few days after that night, German troops controlled most of the cities. 2 months later, organized military resistance on the mainland was broken. Officially, the country was occupied. But here is what is important to understand. There is a difference between capturing a country and capturing a country together with its king, government, and gold. There is a difference between occupation and capitulation. Haakon VII reached London. In June 1940, when Paris fell, when the French signed an armistice in the Compiègne forest, when it seemed that all of Western Europe had laid down under Germany, the Norwegian king spoke on the radio from London. His voice was heard in Norway through underground receivers. He said simply, "We continue." This was not a beautiful gesture. It was a decision with consequences. Norway fought for 62 days, longer than France with its Maginot Line, million-man army, and tank divisions. And then, when the mainland fell, it continued to fight differently. Underground, intelligence, sabotage, Norwegian pilots in British squadrons, Norwegian commandos in raids on the coast. But the most important weapon of Norway turned out to be something that Hitler did not count on at all: the merchant fleet. In 1940, Norway possessed one of the largest merchant fleets in the world, about 1,000 vessels, tankers, cargo ships, refrigerators, total tonnage, about 4 million tons. Think about that figure, 4 million tons. That is roughly 1/5 of the entire world merchant tonnage of that time. When the government went to London, the fleet followed it. Norwegian ships carried cargo for the Allies throughout the war. Oil from America to Britain. Food, ammunition, equipment. Across the Atlantic, under the attacks of German submarines, in storms, in fog, they went. And then the Arctic convoys began. The route from Britain and Iceland to Soviet ports, Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. The most dangerous sea route of the Second World War. The Icy Sea. German submarines. Aviation from Norwegian bases captured by the Germans. Norwegian ships went there too. Historians still argue about how much the Arctic convoys changed the course of the war on the Eastern Front. But no one argues about another thing. Without the Norwegian merchant fleet, there would have been fewer of these convoys. Significantly fewer. This is where the thread from that April night stretches. From old guns and stone casemates to tankers in the North Sea. From 2 torpedoes from the beginning of the century to the cargoes that went to Murmansk. From the decision of one elderly colonel to thousands of people who survived because the necessary materials arrived on time. History does not like simple cause and effect relationships, but sometimes it builds such chains itself that one can only remain silent and watch. One shot, one night, one man who did not wait for permission. And here, thousands of kilometers, thousands of lives, years of war. What happened to this man himself? You will find out right now. Birger Eriksen survived the war. After the surrender of German troops in Norway in May 1945, he was asked about this that night, about that decision, about the 3 words, about what he felt when he gave the order without authorization from above, breaking the regulations, breaking the chain of command, taking on a responsibility that no one gave him. He answered briefly, as he was used to answering for half a century of service. I did what I had to do. There is nothing more to add. In 1945, Colonel Birger Eriksen was awarded the War Medal of Norway, the highest military award of the country. He did get a medal after all. There was no tribunal. He died in 1958. He was 83 years old. Admiral Oskar Kumitz, the one who stood on the bridge of the Blücher and was convinced that the old fortress would not fire, survived. He was rescued from the icy waters of the Fjord. Until the end of the war, he continued to serve in the Kriegsmarine. In 1945, he was taken into British captivity. He was released in 1947. He died in Germany in 1980, 87 years old. A long life after that night. What he thought about Oscarsborg, he never said publicly. The fortress stands to this day. If you find yourself in Norway and travel down the Oslofjord to the south, you will see it. Stone walls, bastions, an island in the middle of the water in the narrowest part of the corridor. Now, it is a national museum. Tourists are taken there. Weddings are held there. In the summer, music plays there. And there they stand, Moses and Aaron, 2 Krupp guns of 1892, in their turrets, aimed in the same direction they were aimed in that night, at the fairway, at the water, into the darkness. They were never loaded again after April 9th, 1940. They did not need to fire anymore. On the bottom of the fjord, 90 meters under the water, lies the Blücher. It is officially recognized as a war grave. Divers are forbidden to touch it. There are still the remains of those who did not get out that night. Together with them, on the bottom, lie the folders, soaked, unreadable, with the lists of people who were never arrested. Sometimes history is decided not on the fields of great battles, not in headquarters, not in offices where people in expensive uniforms move pieces across maps. Sometimes it is decided in a casemate at 4 in the morning by one man who is 64 years old, who for half a century waited for orders from above, and who in one moment realized there will be no order, and fired himself. Again, a dark fjord. Again, an April night. Again, silence. Only now in this silence,